literally could get up on a Wednesday morning and say, today, beards are forbidden, and that would be law from that moment forward. And I could wake up on Friday and say, beard should be 3 inches long. You've got 2 days to grow 3 inches. But that's a ridiculous example, but of a really ridiculous regime. But the people who were suffering under it had finally had enough in February. So I'm going to talk now about what the British Libyan Solidarity Campaign did for the 6 years it was campaigning between its foundation and the uprising. And then I'm going to tell you about my month in Benghazi at the seat of the revolution with the revolutionaries with the revolutionary councils there. The British Libyan Solidarity Campaign was actually launched at Marxism in 2006 because what we felt we needed was to educate the left about what Gaddafi was and what Libya was. And we were wanting to campaign against the oil deals that were in the negotiation between Blair and Gaddafi. We wanted to campaign against the arms deals. We wanted to campaign against the training of Gaddafi's security. We wanted to stop the way Gaddafi was being used as for extraordinary rendition flights. There was a whole host of ways the West was interacting with the regime and propping it up and encouraging its worst excesses of cruelty and degradation to various people. So we felt that the left would be a sympathetic ear for this cause and might join us in our struggle. Unfortunately, we weren't terribly successful at engaging the left. We're not quite sure why, because when you say it out loud, it seems fairly straightforward. But for some reason, the collaboration we hoped for was hard to win and very sparse. And then, after year after year of campaigning, speaking at meetings after meetings, involving ourselves with other people's campaigns in the hope of drawing people in and explaining and encouraging the left to join us, we were suddenly decided that we should really 100% focus on just campaigning against, for Libya, for freedom and justice in Libya. And to some extent, we almost gave up on the left, really. In the months leading up to the uprisings in the Middle East, Azaldine stepped up the campaign outside the Libyan embassy. They became, instead of a weekly vigil there for justice, it became a daily vigil for justice, and it also started on Facebook in a big way. There was encouragement for Libyans who were now getting up courage to make contact with those political refugees in exile in the West, and to encourage them on how to tackle their situation and encourage them on how to come out. What we hoped for was, to see a big upsurge on the back of the wave of what was happening in Tunisia and Egypt, and hope that the Libyan people also felt it and actually had the courage to stand up against the dictator. We actually were very sceptical about whether that would happen. It was hard to imagine because so much, the crackdown in Libya is very, I think, quite different in some ways to in some other countries around where the uprisings were taking place. There was a level of brutality, and that is, if you give you an example, maybe now you've all heard of the massacre at Abu Salim prison, where 1,200 political prisoners were shot dead in 24 hours. This happened in 1996, but it wasn't even admitted to for nearly a decade. So that's just an example of the level of brutality that Gaddafi used to silence his opposition. And there were frequent uprisings in Benghazi, which were all dealt with very brutally and all dealt with very summarily, and people went to prison without any judicial process, and people were executed and people disappeared. So any uprising that had happened in the past had been very quickly squashed, and we did feel that that it may not happen on the same scale as it was happening in Egypt and Tunisia. But events took over, and on the 15th of February, there was the campaign running for the justice for the victims of Abu Salim prison massacre, which had been going for quite